want this evening to finish up textual criticism then. So I trust you're ready to write a lot tonight, so I'm going to put a lot in here tonight so we can get through with it. And then that'll leave us the Apocrypha to study, and the Pseudepigrapha, and the Midrash, and the Talmud, and the Targums. And then will be the Bible translations, which ought to be very enlightening. And then we'll be through.
Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah.
In looking at the text of the New Testament, we've concentrated on the papyri to begin with, because they come the earliest. And in many regards, they're considered to be the most important. Certainly not because of their length. We've seen a lot of them are just a few inches by a few inches, so it's not because they give us an overabundance of material, but because probably they're fairly reliable since they come so early. You'll see from tonight as we go on through the other two categories, finish out Uncials and go through the Minuscules and the Lectionaries, these other ones came quite a bit later, which makes a big difference whenever you're passing down the ladder of time from when the apostles actually lived. We've looked at the three most important Uncials, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, and Vaticanus, and then because we had a little extra time, I think last time, we went through C, or Codex 04, which is Ephraimite. So we're going to start and probably look at another 3 or 4. I'll have to see how many we do of some more fairly important ones of the Uncials. And then we'll go through a list of them like we did with the papyri. So that shouldn't take us very long tonight, because we're not going to spend a lot of time on the Minuscules or the Lectionaries, especially the Lectionaries, besides just listing a few of them, because they're so far removed from the time of the first century when the Bible was written, that is the New Testament. So that brings us to D, or 05, known as Codex Bib. These are some of the more important ones. We said particularly the first 5. You can keep them straight by going in your mind from the numbers, not from the letters, because notice we're on the 4th letter, but Aleph takes up 01, or Sinaiticus, so remember that's what throws us off 1. So Bezi, B-E-Z-A-E. Have any idea where we got the name? What does it look like from someone we've studied before? No? Yeah, Theodore Beza. Remember, he was the Genevan reformer and the French theologian and friend of John Calvin. Well, I'm getting ahead of the story because we haven't gotten to that. What is it? It's the oldest. A lot of these we've given you one particular thing that it's well known for. So here we go again on Codex Bezi. It's the oldest bilingual manuscript of the New Testament. Which means what? 2 languages. What would those 2 languages be? Greek has to be one of them now. Latin. Greek and Latin. Greek text on the left page and the Latin text on the right. We're going to have some other examples you'll see as we go throughout this, but we're talking now about the oldest bilingual manuscript of the New Testament, which means that it doubles the amount of material that we have. I mean, if you've got the whole New Testament, which this doesn't have the whole New Testament, if you did, it would be about the size of the Old Testament because you're doubling it, getting a lot of it in the Latin as well as in the Greek. So you've already guessed the origin of the name. It was named after Theodore Beza, who discovered it in 1562 in the Irenaeus Monastery in Lyons, France. It originated somewhere in southern Europe, but like at least one of the other ones that we've talked about, the origins are rather obscure. Like Vaticanus, we know it's existing back a half a millennium ago because of the catalog that was done by the curator of the library there in Vatican City. But we don't know a lot of the early history about that. Like some of these other ones, we can go a little bit earlier and find out some things about them. Bazzi is one of those that we really don't know a lot about as far as its early history. But we know, at least in modern times, 400 years may sound like a long time ago, but that's considered modern to whenever the manuscript Codex Bazzi was written. But in 1562 it was discovered in France by Theodore Beza, and hence the name. He presented it to the Cambridge Library in 1581, which is where it exists down to this day. It has 406 leaves. The pages measure 8 inches by 10. It has one column. Remember some of the other ones we looked at had as many as 4 columns on a page. Some of them had 2. And then it seems like the later we go, we're ending up with 1 column for just about everything. It has 1 column of 33 lines per page. So it's 1 column that stretches all the way across the page instead of little short columns. It contains the Gospels and Acts in both Greek and Latin, and then it has a few extra verses of 2 John that are found only in the Latin language. Here's John chapter 1, verses 1 to 16 on the right-hand page. This is from Codex Bazzi, and I believe this is the Greek. So this would be the left-hand page of the manuscript. It dates from either the 5th or the 6th century. We're talking about from the 400s up into the 500s AD, from the 5th to the 6th century. Named after John Calvin's friend, the Genevan reformer, Theodore Beza. That's the Greek. But it's interesting because it's bilingual. We've not had any New Testament manuscripts that are bilingual. They're always written in Greek. But we're moving away from New Testament times, so it's only obvious that we're going to have this manuscript as well as more in the future that are at least partly written in Latin. Okay, we'll go on to another one, 06. It's known as Claromontanus. And it's D2, a superscript 2. It's almost best to remember them by the number because that stays pretty much constant from 1 to 297, or from 01, I should say, to 0297, or up to 250 for the ones that are well known down to this day, excluding those other ones that have not been made available to the general public yet. Claromontanus. D2. It's a little strange because we've got already a D with Codex Bazzi, and now we've got a D2. Probably the reason it's been done that way is because it more or less serves as a complement to Codex Bazzi. Remember we said Bazzi has the Gospels and Acts. Claromontanus has Paul's epistles, all of Paul's epistles. Now, it doesn't have Revelation. It doesn't go on into some of the later epistles at the end of the New Testament, but it kind of serves as a complement to Codex Bazzi. So it is different. It's an entirely different manuscript. Don't let the D and the D2 confuse you. It's an entirely different manuscript. But it's good that you've got them together because we're talking about around the same time, and we're talking about one that can kind of add to and complement the other. It too is bilingual. It has the Greek on the left page and the Latin on the right. Its name comes from a monastery in France where it was discovered by Theodore Beza. His name is popping up again. And it was purchased in 1656 by King Louis XIV of France for the National Library of Paris, where it still is today. A lot of these have ancient history. Half a millennium ago, they were deposited, these famous European universities or libraries, and for the most part, they're still there down to this day. And then in 1853, 200 years after the time it was purchased by King Louis XIV, it was thoroughly and completely edited by none other than Tischendorf. So we're popping up with his name again. You see Tischendorf's name many times, as well as Beza. We've talked about him when we talked about New Testament Greek Bibles, where he gave us, I think, 9 editions, and then one that was published posthumously. So he did a lot for New Testament studies. Being bilingual is going to have a lot of material. It contains 553 leaves. You remember this compared to some of the ones we've talked about earlier, like Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, which measures 7 by 9, a single column of 21 lines per page. And it dates from around the 6th century. The Greek on the left, the Latin on the right. The Greek is good. The Latin, it's fairly inferior, at least grammatically. So here you've got the double page. Here you've got the Greek on the left and the Latin over here on the right. This is a page from Claromontanus. Around the 6th century, we're moving away from the New Testament days. Not that they're not important, but just not as important, we should say, as the earlier ones. Okay, now we're going to skip in numbers all the way down to Codex W, or 032. I just thought I would include one more as far as a little discussion. We're not going to discuss all of them. Remember, there are 297 of them. We'd be here a long time giving you a history of every one of them. We're just looking at the earlier ones, the more important ones, at least in a little detail. The others we'll just give you representative names from. And the name of it is Washingtonianus. Just spell Washington and end it out with I-A-N-U-S. It was part, and that's where it gets W from. It was part of a group of manuscripts that were obtained by a Detroit businessman, Charles Freer, in 1906 from some antiquities dealers in Cairo, Egypt. And it contains the Gospels, most of Paul's letters, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and the Psalms. It's all in Greek. So it's different from Bib and Claromontanus in that it's not bilingual. And it has, remember we talked earlier about the different endings to the Gospel of Mark. Remember the no ending view and the short ending view and the long ending view? And the short ending view is found in a few Uncials, and the no ending view doesn't make any sense just to end there and not have anything. And the long ending view is found in the majority of the Uncials and the Latin manuscripts and things like this, which is what we have in King James. Well, Washingtonianus has the long ending of Mark, but then it has also, I guess we could call this the double long ending of Mark, because it has an additional passage inserted between verses 14 and 15. It's kind of long, but you might want to copy it down because it's, it's another one of those interesting additions. You can kind of tell, or you should be able to, you can kind of tell when something's extra-biblical, but yet you can tell it's probably got some type of biblical basis. Somebody's been listening to stories about Jesus, and somebody's been reading their New Testament, and somehow different things were inserted. So I'll take my time because we've got plenty of it tonight and go through it. They've got the long ending that goes, all the way down through verse 20, but like we've got in King James Version. But between verses 14 and 15, you have the following. And they excused themselves, saying, I think verse 14, well, I better look it up before I say, he's upbraiding them for their unbelief. So maybe that's what the passage meant when it says they're excusing themselves. Yeah, that's what verse 14 is about. So they're justifying themselves, which doesn't sound like the apostles when they're confronting the risen Lord here just before his ascension. Just doesn't sound like them. But anyway, it goes as follows. And they excused themselves, saying. So this, I guess, would refer to the apostles, to the 11 apostles. This age of lawlessness. Now, there's nothing wrong with the word lawlessness, by the way, because that's in your New Testament. It's just been translated by different words. Lawlessness is generally thought of as a better translation for some words in your New Testament, but I don't want to get into that. If you read your King James Bible, not that I remember, can you find a single place where you're going to find the English word lawlessness there? But it's a good translation of a certain Greek word. This age of lawlessness and unbelief is under Satan. This age, that's what the New Testament says, that this is an evil age from which we've been delivered. Not an evil world. There's nothing wrong with the world. It's the age that we're in that's evil. Who does not allow the truth and the power of God to prevail over the unclean things of spirits. Therefore, reveal thy righteousness now. Kind of like, I guess, transfiguration is what they want, for him to reveal it now. Therefore, reveal thy righteousness now. Thus they spoke of Christ. And then the second half of this little extra biblical addition is going to give us Jesus' response to them. And Jesus replied to them, the term of years for Satan's power has been fulfilled. Well, that's in agreement with the New Testament. We're told over in Colossians 3 that he spoiled principalities and powers. He embarrassed principalities and powers, is what Paul says in Colossians 2. He trampled them. And he told us in Luke 10 we could do the same thing to serpents and scorpions. We could trample them. Psalm 91, we can trample the lion, the young lion, the serpent, the cobra under our feet. We have a lot of power, in other words. His reign was abolished. The term of years for Satan's power has been fulfilled, but other terrible things draw near, which would probably have reference to the fall of Jerusalem and the atrocities associated with that, just 4 decades after his ascension. And for those who have sinned, I was delivered over to death. Romans 8:32, he delivered him up for us all. So you see, it's certainly got biblical content here. No doubt about that. That they may return to the incorruptible glory of righteousness which is in heaven. That they may return to the incorruptible glory of righteousness which is in heaven. I'll go through it all at one time. They excuse themselves, saying, this age of lawlessness and unbelief is under Satan, who does not allow the truth and the power of God to prevail over unclean things of the spirits. Now that's a little strange, the way that's said. And so is this, therefore reveal thy righteousness now. Thus they spoke of Christ, and Christ replied to them, the term of years for Satan's power has been fulfilled, but other terrible things draw near, and for those who have sinned I was delivered over to death, that they may return to the incorruptible glory of righteousness which is in heaven. It's like phrases you'd find out of the Didache, that like a song we sing around here, that the Lord gave some music to somebody in the body from a phrase out of the Didache, that we don't know whether Paul and John actually went around saying that, but it was a saying of the early believers after them, and there's nothing unscriptural about it, just as long as you don't try to insert it back in the Bible. This makes a lot of sense. A lot of what's said here makes a lot of sense, but it's suspect that it should be there. Turn over to John chapter 8. We've talked about this passage before. But turn over to John chapter 8, and of course we're kind of all accustomed to this if we've been raised with this version of the Bible, just kind of seeing it in our Bible. And it again makes a lot of sense, but there are some things that kind of look mystical in what's said here. We have the account of these pious religious people who, of course, we know they never sinned in their life before, and they've caught a woman right in the act of adultery. Now they're trying to embarrass Jesus by asking him, what should they do? Because they kind of have recognized in his ministry mercy and grace. So they think he can't possibly tell us to stone the woman, but that's what Moses said. Is he going to contradict Moses? Then we know he's not of God if he's going to contradict Moses. So they've got him in a corner. Verse 6, this they said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground, and notice all of this in italics here, as though he heard them not. Well, it's an interesting account. We don't ever find him doing anything like this. And just because you don't doesn't mean this is not true. If you have to have another passage that says the identical same thing before you're going to believe it, then you'd be missing out on some blessings in a number of places in the Bible. Amen. But generally, he doesn't just pretend like he doesn't know what's going on. He puts them in their place right away. And they have to wait a while before he goes on to do what he does so quickly in other places. So they continued asking him. They keep pestering him about this. He lifted up himself and said unto them, he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And you can just really see the psychological blows that he's leveling against them here, which makes it suspect. It looks like someone is trying to build up our image of Christ by writing something really neat like this. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground, and they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had lifted up himself, and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Well, there's nothing unscriptural about the account here. It's just that it's suspect on the basis of the manuscripts, and that's why we've studied the manuscripts. I think we said earlier when we looked at the passage that no doubt it probably had a basis in history. Something like this took place. Maybe even this identical story took place. But yet it was not written down by John. It was written down by someone later on. It was passed down by word of mouth. Maybe that's why we got some of the mystical things that have entered in, because of the distortions of the memory of people. You pass one thing down, and someone else hears something different than what you said. And then it goes to a second person and a third, and don't tell me what you get as a result of that. So since you don't have it in the early manuscripts, and you don't need it, there are a lot of other passages that teach essentially the same thing. He didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. People have had a problem. Well, he's justifying, he's saying it's okay to be a harlot. No. He said, I don't condemn you, but he said, go and don't do it anymore. You've got to read the whole passage there. People say, well, see, he was real easy. He loved the harlots. No. He wanted the harlots to get out of their harlotry. And then they were okay. The thieves to get out of their thievery, and then they were okay. He said, I don't condemn you, but go and don't do it anymore. Amen. Go trusting in me, go and sin no more. So it's just safe to stay away from it and don't teach lessons and sermons out of that passage, since we don't have it in the early manuscripts. Well, I think I was saving a picture of Washingtonianus. It's in the Smithsonian Institution. That's where it got its name, Washington. That's where it was placed, because it was donated by Freer to the Smithsonian. And it dates around the 4th or the 5th century A.D. It's one of the only uncials that we have in this country. We don't have very many uncials. You notice from where we're listing them, most of them, the vast majority of them are over in Europe. Just because that's where the population was back a half a millennium ago. It wasn't with American people here in this country. People were here, Indian people, but they weren't interested in Bible manuscripts. Okay, those are the only ones we're going to look at in detail tonight. So let's spend a little time giving you a list of some other ones. There's so many, I didn't take the time to write all of them down for the overhead. I did get the list started. And there's just so many of them, I thought I'd probably just read them off slowly enough. But I think we've got through 28, something around 28, and then we can finish it on out. Now we're still on uncials now. We've already given you the papyri. So we're giving you in the far left-hand column the letter. First the Hebrew letter, then we go through the English alphabet, then we start with the Greek. And when you run out of that, you just stop putting letters there. Then in the next column, we have the number prefixed with a 0, which refers to an uncial. Then in the column that you're missing, I've got the official name of it. I might try to give those to you. They're such long names it becomes burdensome. Then we've got the EAPCR classification, then where it's found, and then what century it dates from. And so we've given you all the way down through D2, 06, Claromontanus, which brings us all the way down to here. Now let me give you one clue about the EAPCR. There's not a C here. I left the C out. The A stands for Acts and the Catholic epistles. Notice you don't see any C's here. The Catholic epistles will be found wherever you've got an A. Some of them, not necessarily all of them. So it's really just the EAPR designation. So we have left 01, Sinaiticus, EAPR. It's located in London and it dates from the 4th century. A02, Alexandrinus, EAPR, London, 5th century. B03, Vaticanus, EA, the A would really just stand for Acts there. EAP, because it stops towards the end of the book of Hebrews and doesn't have the Catholic epistles or the book of Revelation. It's found in the Vatican Library in Rome, and it dates from the 4th century, the same as Sinaiticus. Then C04, Ephraimi, EAPR, Paris, 5th century. D05, Bazzi, EA. Remember the E stands for the evangelist of the Gospels. In Cambridge, 6th century. We've got a lot of these to give, so I trust you're prepared to write. D206, Claromontanus. P, Pauline epistles. Remember, it was the complement to Bazzi, which had the Gospels and Acts. It's found in Paris, and it dates the 6th century. Now, those were the first 6 that we've covered. So you won't have the official names to any of these others, and they're not up here. You'll have to listen as I give them. 07, Basiliensis. A lot of these are spelled just like they sound, Basiliensis. E is found in Basel, and it dates from the 8th century. Then we have E2, 08, Laudianus. A, all it has is Acts. I don't even believe it has the Catholic epistles. It's found in Oxford. It's another bilingual. It has the Greek on the left page, the Latin on the right page of the book of Acts. It dates from the 6th century. And the most interesting thing about it, those that have some interesting peculiarity, I'll give to you. The most interesting thing about Laudianus is that it's the earliest manuscript to have Acts 8 and verse 37, which we found to be not valid, so we've marked it out, which reads as follows. And Philip said, If thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. This Ethiopian eunuch answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Remember, we took that verse out a good while ago when we looked back at variants to the very beginning of TC, which we found to be not valid, so we've marked it out, which reads as follows. And Philip said, If thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. This Ethiopian eunuch answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Remember, we took that verse out a good while ago when we looked back at variants to the very beginning of TC. So Laudianus, Laudianus, is the earliest of the manuscripts, the 6th century to have Acts 8 and verse 37. Okay, F09, Borelianus, Borelianus. It contains the Gospels. It's found in the Netherlands, and it dates the 9th century. Then F2, 010, Augiensis, Augiensis. Augiensis has the Pauline epistles. It's in Cambridge, and it's a bilingual. I don't think I have the special points up there. I've just got a few of them marked down. It's a bilingual, again, of Greek and Latin. Greek on the left page, Latin on the right. That's important because we're going to come to a change in that here in a few moments. And it dates from the 9th century. Then the next one would be G, 011. Can you imagine how long it would take if we went through all 300 of them? Wolfi, A, W-O-L-F-I-I. Wolfi and then a capital A, just the name of it. Wolfi, A. E is found in London. It dates the 9th century. Then G2, 012, Boerneriensis, B-O-E-R-N-E-R-I-A-N-U-S. P is found in Germany. It's a bilingual, but it has the Greek with the Latin interlinear. In other words, the Latin is not on a separate page, but it's written between the Greek lines. So this is our earliest uncial interlinear, bilingual interlinear. You could have a Greek line, then a Latin line that gave you in Latin what the above Greek line gave, then a Greek, then a Latin, then a Greek, then a Latin all the way through it, instead of all Greek on one page and all Latin on another. It dates from the 9th century. This is 012. And it has the name of the epistle to the Laodiceans in it, but it doesn't have the text. It has it on a blank page as though it were going to give it, but it gave us no text. Remember over in Colossians 4 that we studied a long time ago about the epistle to the Laodiceans. Then H013, Wolfi B. Contains the Gospels. It's in Hamburg, Germany, and it dates from the 9th century. Then H3, 015, Koislinianus, Koislinianus. Has the Pauline epistles. It dates from the 6th century, and it's scattered in different places. Some of it's found in Paris, some of it's found in Leningrad, some of it's found in Kiev, some of it's found in Moscow, so it's scattered in different places. And we said that dates the 6th century. Then I-016, Washingtonianus. Not the same one we just looked at. That was W. We're on I. Washingtonianus, P. It's in the Smithsonian as well. And it dates from the 5th century. K-017 is known as Cyprius, C-Y-P-R-I-U-S. Contains the Gospels. It's in Paris, and it dates from the 9th century. L-019, Regius, R-E-G-I-U-S. E, Paris, 8th century. The only one besides Basiliensis thus far that's from the 8th century. And a footnote to this is that it has both the short and the long ending for Mark, which generally you're going to have one or the other or neither. You're not going to have both of them together. But it has the short ending, and we've already given you that, so I'm not going to quote that to you again. Back when we studied, I think, the third message in variants. Then we come to O-023. These are some of the more important ones that have interesting footnotes to them. You can see we're skipping numbers. Sinopensis, S-I-N-O-P-E-N-S-I-S. We're on O-023. Sinopensis, E. Paris, 6th century. And it's remarkable because it was written with golden ink on purple dyed vellum. Exquisitely beautiful manuscript when you see it in color. You can imagine what gold would look like on purple for a manuscript. The vellum was dyed purple, and then golden ink was used. Not melted gold or anything. They dyed the ink and made it the color of gold. It's just a beautiful manuscript. I think we've got another one like that too, like that in the Minuscules that we'll come to later on. Okay, P2. You see, when we were up on H, we did H, then we did H3, so we skipped an H2. So some of them got tagged with the same letter, and then you use different superscripts. So P2, we're skipping P1, it's not as important. 025, Porphyrianus, P-O-R-P-H-Y-R-I-A-N-U-S. Porphyrianus. APR. Now what's different so far? Revelation. Revelation. One of the very few uncials to contain Revelation without going back to the very first three that we looked at, or the first couple that we looked at. It's found in Leningrad. Dates the 9th century. It's a lot later than those earlier ones, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, and Ephraimi, all three of which had Revelation. So it's one of the very few uncials to contain Revelation. That kind of stands out to you whenever you see all those letters together, like we've got right here. It just stands out because none of the others have had Revelation till we go all the way back up to Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, and then Ephraimi. Okay, R027. This only goes to 28, so then you'll be dependent on me from there on out. Nitriensis, Nitriensis. E, London, 6th century. Again, I just picked some of these out. I picked these out because they're interesting. It's a palimpsest in the first place. It's a palimpsest of Luke, and attached along with it, we have 4,000 lines of Homer's Iliad. So Luke and the Iliad go together in Codex 027. 4,000 lines of the Iliad attached to the end of Luke. You have to kind of doubt whoever copied that manuscript, putting Homer along with Luke. Then S028, known as Vaticanus. So we're to a second Vaticanus now. E, obviously it's in Rome. A footnote for it is that it's one of the earliest self-dated manuscripts of the Gospels. And it dates itself in the year 949 AD. So we have a specific date on this, unlike all of the others that we've looked at thus far in the area of the Uncials. So it's one of the earliest manuscripts that contains the Gospels that dates itself, 949. Okay, V031, Mosquensis, Mosquensis. E, again, you can probably notice most of them, if they have anything, they have E, because that was what was important to know the life and the history of the founder of Christianity. It's in Moscow, dates from the 9th century. The letters that are used are broken up into two categories. Uncials are used from the beginning of Matthew to John 8:39. Uncials. And so it's that part of the manuscript that dates from the 9th century. Then from the next verse to the end of the Gospel of John, all this contains is just the Gospels, we have 13th century minuscule letters. So it was written later, and it was obviously written by a different hand, unless somebody lived 400 years. Then we've already done W, 032, Washingtonianos, E, Washington, 5th century. That was one of the ones we looked at particularly because of that insertion it has between Mark 14, the 14th verse and the 15th verse of Mark chapter 16. Well, we're running out, we have run out now of English letters. We go to Greek letters, delta. And if you can't write the letter, just get the number down, 037. Sangallensis, Sangalllensis. Sangallensis, E, it's found in Switzerland. It's another Greek manuscript with a Latin interlinear that dates from the 9th century. Then Xi, 040. Zacynthus, 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 E, found in London, dates 6th century. Interesting footnote, it's the earliest known manuscript with a marginal commentary. Epsilon, 042, Rossanensis, 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 E, it's in Italy, 6th century. Footnote, it's the earliest Bible to be adorned with watercolors. Then we're getting near the end of the Greek alphabet when we do omega, 045. It's known as Athous Dionysiou. 2 words, Athous, Athous, Dionysiou, Diony, Siou, E, it's in Athos, Greece, 9th century, and it's probably one of the oldest examples of the Byzantine text type, is Athous Dionysiou. Okay, we're out of letters. Remember Gregory's system? You go through English, then you go through Greek, then once you run out, you forget about letters, but you stay with numbers prefixed with a 0. So we have 3 more to do. 046. Vaticanus. This is our 3rd Vaticanus. And what does it contain? Just take a guess, since we're pausing there. No? Revelation. That's all it has, is Revelation. Of course, it's in Rome, and it's pretty late. One of the latest ones, I guess the latest one we've covered, it dates from the 10th century. Then a couple of the other ones that have been used by scholars. 0165. Now we're out of names for the manuscript. So that's why I said the best thing is to stay with the number. Because sooner or later you get out of letters, and sooner or later you get out of names, but you never run out of your numbers. 0165. It's got no name. It contains Acts. It's found in Berlin. And it's real early. It dates from the 5th century. Then the last one of the popularly known ones is 0250. E, Cambridge Library, and it dates from the 8th century. We've said before that today the Uncials go up to at least 0297, but those last 47 aren't well known. So many have been uncovered recently, and they're just waiting on shelves to be published, to be edited, to be printed, to be gotten out for the general public, as well as just for other scholars. So we'll stop with 250, but it goes on up to 0297. At least that far, probably further today. Okay, that covers 1/2 then of the New Testament manuscript witnesses. That covers the papyri. We spend most of our time there, obviously, with the papyri and with the Uncials because of their early date. Now let's come to the Minuscules. Now we're talking about from the 10th century onward. Again, in the EAPCR, I left out C and just included Catholic epistles with Acts because generally it just happens that you'll find them together. So, let's start with looking at a few of the Minuscules. How do you designate the Minuscules? Just a number. So we'll start with 1. No 0 in front of it. If it's a 0, then you're talking about an uncial. 1 EAP is found in Basel, and it has the Caesarean text type. It was one of the manuscripts used by Erasmus for his Greek New Testament. And not only is 1 a manuscript, but 1 heads up a family of minuscules known as Family 1 group. I'm going to give you some of the other members because they're very, very similar in what they have and don't have. Not necessarily in the way they're written, just in what they have and don't have. In other words, it would appear as though this list that I'm going to give you kind of originated with 1, and therefore 1 is kind of the founding father of the group known as Family 1 group of minuscules. So here are some others in Family Group 1. Number 118, number 131, number 209, and number 1582. And it dates from the 12th century. Remember, most of these we're talking about from the 10th century onward, most of these. Okay, number 2, E. It's in Basel, Switzerland, and it dates from the 12th century. Number 3, EAP in Vienna, and it dates from the 12th century. Number 13, E, Paris. It's very similar to number 1 because it heads up Family 13 group of minuscules. Family 1 group and Family 13 are 2 important groups of minuscules. And 1 would be the founding father, so to speak, of its group, and 13 of its group. So Family 13 includes the following minuscules. In other words, we wouldn't cover all of these minuscules separately because they are very, very similar in what they have and don't have to their founding father, either 1 or 13. So Family 13 group includes 69, 124, 174, 230, 346, 543, 788, 826, 828, 983, 1689, and 1709. And all of these in this group contain the John 8 the chapter 8 in John passage. They all contain the little story about the woman in adultery. Number 33, EAP, Paris, and it's known as the Queen of the Cursives because it's probably the most reliable of the minuscules. So it would compare with the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus in the minuscule group. Number 33 would probably be the most important of the minuscules, an easy number to remember. Number 33, EAP, Paris, it's known as the Queen of the Minuscules. And it dates from the 9th century, which is very, very early to be a minuscule manuscript. Okay, 61. You probably won't remember the history of this one, but 61, EAPR. Dublin. So it's got all of the New Testament. And this was that one used by Erasmus to get his heavenly witness passage over in 1 John 5. Remember that the Cardinal Francisco Jimenez de Cisneros was trying to be the first one to get a Greek New Testament out, and he was just working and working away on that, and he finally got it written up, and the Pope wouldn't allow him to have it published, and he went through a lot, and at the same time the Swiss printer had heard about what Jimenez was going to be doing, and so he hired Erasmus to see if he could beat him. And remember that Jimenez's manuscript, the Complutensian Polyglot, was the first one to be printed, but the first one to be published was Erasmus' edition around 1514 or so, 1516, somewhere around there, the first New Testament to be printed in the Greek. We just hadn't had a lot of Bibles coming off the Greek press. It hadn't been around but 100 years, so we just haven't had that very many of them coming off. And remember, someone's asked him, why didn't he have that heavenly witness passage in there? This was that Franciscan friar named Froy. And he challenged the fellow, well, if you can find me a manuscript that has it in there, that in my next edition, which was going to be his third edition that came out around 1522, I'll put it in there. And history kind of informs us that someone wrote this around 1520, whenever he was challenging Erasmus, this minuscule number 61, and put that passage in there just so it would get into Erasmus's edition. And because the third edition was the cheapest of his, it became widespread, and a lot that was in that found its way over into the King James Version. So that's what makes 61 so famous. So we'll date it the 16th century. It has to be late. And it was written on paper. So it's got to be later than the earlier ones that we've been talking about. Makes it probably one of the latest, one of the most recent of the minuscule manuscripts from the 16th century. So that's the history of it with Erasmus and that Franciscan friar named Freud. I can't help that they all start with an F. They just do. 81, AP, London. It's self-dated 1044. It's a very important, reliable, minuscule manuscript. Then we'll quickly go through some others. 88, APR. Notice that we're getting more revelation in here because the later ones had revelation. Naples, the 12th century. Number 104, APR, London. Self-dated 1087. Number 112, E, Oxford, the 11th century. 181, APR, Rome. The A and the P part come from the 11th century, and the R from the 15th. So two different dates, the 11th and the 15th centuries. Number 203, APR, London, dated in the year 1111. 326, AP, Oxford, 12th century. 383, AP, Oxford, 13th century. 565, E, Leningrad, 10th century. Known for being probably the most beautiful biblical manuscript, written with gold letters on dyed purple vellum. Even more beautiful, the colors are even more outstanding than on the Uncial that we mentioned before. So that's number 565. Number 666, E, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Dates the 13th century. And it at one time belonged to Professor Caspar Rene Gregory. And he gave it to Harvard in 1899, which is where it's found today in Cambridge. Here's the title page. But I say it had E, that makes sense, because a lot of drawings. Here's John, the Apostle John, sitting at his desk. You can see inkwells in his little cabinet, and his little pens and little knives and little Bible notes, and you can see all the markings, all the designs. Because it's so late, a lot of the minuscules have all types of fancy designs drawn on them. This is manuscript 666. 1739, AP, it's in Athos, Greece, 10th century. And in the margin, it has notes from the writings of some of the early fathers, like Eusebius and Clement and Irenaeus and Origen and so forth. Then the last one, 2646. Remember, this is as high, or maybe you don't remember, but this is as high as we go with the minuscules. It's 2646. E, Oxford, 12th century. Which finally leaves us with a few of the lectionaries. Now, these are generally not thought of as being as important as the other manuscripts, but recently they're coming into their own in textual studies. We're just going to mention three of them. They're designated by a small letter L and then a number afterwards. So L1 contains the Gospels. It's in Paris. Dates from the 10th century. And it has uncial letters on parchment. Not uncial on papyrus, but uncial on parchment. Then L2, the Gospels, Paris. 10th century uncial letters on parchment. same as L1. These, remember, were a compilation of the lections, certain readings in certain parts of the Bible that the church went by in her ecclesiastical calendar back in the early centuries, and that were put into whole books known as lectionaries. And then the last one, this is the highest one we have, is L 1997, which contains Acts and a few of the epistles. It's in Manchester, 14th century, and now we've gone from uncial to minuscule letters and from parchment to paper. No readings at all from the book of Revelation in any of the extant lectionaries. And some parts of Acts and the epistles, I think we've mentioned before, are missing. Of course, when you put all the lectionaries together from 1 to 1997, a whole lot of the Gospels will just be repeated dozens and dozens of times in different lectionaries, as well as some of Acts, as well as some of the epistles. But there are small portions of Acts and the epistles which aren't found in any of these 1,997 lectionaries, and no verses at all of Revelation are found in any of the lectionaries. Okay, that finishes textual criticism. We went all through the variants and all the different rules of textual criticism and the different Bibles that were printed, the different editions that came out, and we looked at the Old Testament text, the Masoretes, the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of the other manuscripts that validate the Old Testament writings, and then the New. And that's all we've got to say about textual criticism. So that should be a good, nothing but an introduction, but a good introduction, that you have the working material available at your fingertips on textual criticism. And I'm sure it'll come in handy for you sooner or later. You can go back to your own notes and look something up on one of these ancient papyri or uncial or minuscule manuscripts and see when it's dated and what it contains and how reliable it is. So I don't know if we're going to start next week. As far as I know, we will, unless the Lord has us put a break in there like we've done before. Every time we get to a new division of biblical lit, we take a 6-month break. But assuming that we don't, we'll be back next week talking about a whole new array of subjects.